We now get to the heart of centering prayer. And it's a very short video that I'm going to send you that I made like 2.5 minutes on the Espresso series about this. And it really doesn't do it justice. So we might even take more than a few weeks to do this. But the topic now is how centering prayer loosens, erodes, and transforms our false self. And if there's anything that centering prayer has done for me, it's set me free, sometimes just by itself, like boom, set me free. Other times by being more aware of the grip that the false self has on me. And so let's just get into this. Jesus said, unless a grain of seed dies, it can't germinate and become a plant. And in the same way, we have to die to ourselves. And as a Christian, I always struggled very much with that verse because I really didn't know what it meant. And like at the worst moments, I thought, well, what it means is I have to go to Calcutta and be like Mother Teresa and have no money and like feed the sick. Otherwise, I can't really enjoy this thing that Jesus is talking about dying to yourself. And so that verse tends to be for many Christians this like gnawing irritant. It's like it's there. It's so clear in what Christ said because he said it many times. He said, just as I'm about to do, meaning he'd be crucified. And he even compared it to his crucifixion and resurrection. He was saying to his disciples, like, if you guys want to have resurrection life, you've got to die to yourself. Watch me, okay? And so this is, I don't want to say what percentage, but a very significant percentage of Christ's teachings was on this whole issue of dying to yourself. He even used the analogy of it with the Pharisees. He said, because they were trying to trick him into some, they're often like trying to trap him. I guess a bit like our politics these days,
with their laws, yeah.
When a journalist tries to trap a politician, like, what do you mean? And so they'd ask Jesus questions like, should we pay taxes to Caesar? Knowing there's no right answer. It's like a very terrible answer, because if he says, yes, you must pay, then the Jews would be against him. And if he said, no, you mustn't pay, then the Romans would, be against him. And one of the trap questions is they asked him about the temple. Like, what do you say about the temple? Because the temple had become this very important holy place. And just like he answered the question about the money, should you pay taxes to Caesar, which was genius, right? You guys remember that? He said, well, hand me a coin. And he hands them a coin. And he like changes the topic to what's most important, but by answering the question. He said, whose inscription do you see on this coin? They said, Caesar's. She said, pay to Caesar what is Caesar, but pay to God's what is God's. And so, genius answer, because his emphasis was actually on the second part. Give to God what is God's. There's a picture of Caesar on this coin. Give it to Caesar. There's a picture of God on your life. Give that to God. Emphasis being on the latter, right? And so in regards to the temple, like they said, well, what do you think about the temple? And Jesus said, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will have it rebuilt. And it was like the shocking answer, like, what the heck? It's a bit like if you ask Trump or Kamala about the border, like, what are you going to do about immigration? And then they just say something so radical. It's like they say, blow up this border, and then I will, it was that caliber. But his the disciples who wrote the gospel converted that into what he must have explained to them afterwards he meant, which it says he wasn't talking about the temple. He was talking about the temple of his own body. And he was saying, destroy this and I'll raise it up after 3 days. In other words, prophesying the resurrection. But the point is, again and again and again and again, there's this theme about dying to yourself. And again, for most Christians, that's just like this gnawing irritant. What does that mean? Well, let me jump to it. What that means is God is trying to get the false part of you to die, without which you cannot experience divine life. Because your false self is 100% opposed to God, and it's 100% obstacle to God's freedom, his presence, his love, his life in you. And to the extent that the false self controls any part of your life, the presence of God, the goodness of God, the grace of God, the eternal beauty, the abundance, the health, the joy, the peace of God can't get there. And so it's possible for us to maintain pockets of our lives that are hell and are insulated from God's getting in there and transforming them by pockets of the false self in our lives. And so let's jump to psychology and modern thought. We now know that these are also neural pathways in our minds. We know that our minds develop very complicated but very clear programs that, let me give you an example. You grew up perceiving that you weren't loved enough. Maybe at age 2 months, you cried in the crib, they didn't come fast enough, you couldn't think about it all, but somewhere inside that little baby brain of yours, this like flashing light came on of, oh, I'm not loved. And so your baby reaction was to say, I'll cry louder. Oh, okay. If I cry this long, they do come and pick me up. Great. That's my go-to solution, to cry. Then 2 years later, you don't cry anymore, you shout. And then 5 years later, you don't cry or shout anymore. Let's make it up. You shoot your toy gun very loud and break your father's window, because that's now what your brain has concluded is the best way to get attention. Sure, you're going to get a beating, but it's great because you feel somehow like eyes are on you, and it's meeting that need inside you that says, I'm not loved. And so you progress through life, and you walk into your school classroom on the first day, and somebody bullies you, and your little mind figures out a response to that, which could be that you really are scared of going to that class, or that you spend half an hour in the morning combing your hair beautifully, because subconsciously then the girls won't bully you and mock you. I could go on and on and on, but your mind devotes a huge amount of energy to fixing and self-solving this problem, which comes down to, I don't know if I'm loved enough. And so you develop these neural pathways, and in fact, Thomas Keating uses the word energy centers. You develop this massive machine inside your mind that is constantly thinking of clever ways to get that need met of being loved. And it becomes like let's call it a virus. It's like a computer program that's happening in your head automatically, and most of the time you don't even know it's running. It's running in the background. Every now and again, when your efforts become too extreme, so maybe you're in a relationship and you become overly jealous or overly needy towards your partner, there's a blow up, and after you've gotten over how it's all their fault, you might reflect for a second and say, gosh, I was a bit of a jerk then. But that's about the closest you ever get to noticing that this program's running, and it leaves a trail of destruction. But just think about it if you take a step back. Here is God trying to beam love at you directly. Whenever you pray, God could be touching that deepest need through presence, through other people. But your mind is closed to it, can't get that because of this false self thing. That's the thing Jesus is saying must die until the true seed of your potential, of your humanity, of your divinity can become a plant and grow into the image of God. So this thing I'm just saying to you is so central to Christ's gospel. And what Christ was pretty clear about is that it doesn't require military type discipline. So that's one of the big flaws. A lot of modern Christianity tries to drum good behavior into you through other means. So for example, let's say you swear a lot. And let's say you swear because of something in your false self, right? What conventional Christianity will do to you is it will stop you swearing by imposing shame on you, that's just not the way we operate as a church. And so you've got this new negative energy being used to stop another negative behavior. And that's just not doing what Jesus said, which is you got to die. That's just like putting another virus in to try and fix the first virus. And so the first virus is suppressed, but now there's a worse thing in you, which is shame. Which, by the way, guilt and shame are some of the most counterproductive things. In fact, and I warn you, as you progress in centering prayer, God's going to He's going to expose and set you free of these false self things. And He won't begin with the things you think. So, in other words, let's say you've got some base issue. Let me pick an easy one. You overeat. Like for you, food has become, and I'm saying this because I think nobody on the call does this. There's probably some others I could pick that are closer to home. So you overeat, and so then you start centering prayer, and like something inside you realizes, well, that bad behavior is something I need to die to. But the funny thing is God will get to that last or later. In fact, He might get to some things that you've been using to suppress the thing about eating too much, and you might even feel free to eat more and to be more loose about how much you eat, because now, for example, God has released the shame that you had about eating too much. And so now you're free there, but because you're free there, now the eating, so you've rewound 20 years, if you know what I mean. So this is, and I'm going to try and end now because, like I say, we'll dwell on this for some more weeks, but what centering prayer does, and this is why our mind is so distracting when we try to meditate, because the minute you try to be silent, which means accessing God's presence, the mind and the existence of all of these messed up programs, these viruses running in the background, they still going. And now you notice them. You know what? They're going just as much during your normal day, but you're not noticing them because you're drafting a contract. But now you're trying to be silent, and the mind is thinking thoughts that link to one of your deep broken needs. And that's why having the distracting thoughts is such a part of the process of meditation, especially centering prayer, because it's revealing them. And then every time you say your sacred word and you say, God, I surrender to your presence and action, what you're also saying is, I give up this thought. I'm not giving this thought energy right now. But by doing that, you're doing something you hardly ever do, because you're always giving energy to those thoughts, but now you're not. And so for the first time in your life, you actually, without the help of a psychologist, are loosening the hold that neural pathway has on you. And Thomas Keating calls God the divine therapist. in centering prayer, God is your divine therapist, because God, in a beautiful way, allows these thoughts to bubble up, gives you the choice, not forcing you. Do you want to choose me, or do you want to go with that thought? And every time you say the sacred word, you choose God, you let go of the thought, you're loosening the neural programming. For me, centering prayer was revolutionary and life-changing within a few months, because a couple of deep habits just suddenly fell away. They were loosened. But now, 7 years in, there's 4 layers down of things that still need to die. But you know what's awesome? What centering prayer's done is it's revealed them to me. So now during my day, while I'm doing an Excel spreadsheet or cycling on my bike, I'm much more aware, oh my gosh, my mind just wants to go off on something that feeds into my unhealthy need for affirmation. Okay. So this is an incredible, this here is the third Bible truth. Remember, I'm doing 4 Bible truths that are like within Orthodox Christianity that explain why centering prayer works. And this is the third one, but this one is the transformative one. The first one, just to recap, is the truth of the indwelling presence of God. Because God dwells in us, that's why you can just be silent and God's immediately working, because he's here, he's not out there. The second truth, which is the spiritual nature of human beings, means that if you go into the inner room, you go into the real control center of your life, and you've never been there much. And this practice gets you there. But this third one, the idea that you've got this false self, and the false self is 3 things. Like Thomas Keating has masterfully created 3 buckets that the false self is. And interestingly, Jesus said it the same way, because Christ's 3 temptations in the desert are the 3 parts of the false self. So the false self is firstly the unhealthy need for security. That includes stuff like needing money to feel safe, needing food, sex, pleasures, whatever to feel safe. Number 2, the unhealthy need for affirmation. That's needing people to like you, and a lot of the energy of what you do is all about what people will think of you. Spoiler alert, that's my big one, just being open. And the third one is the unhealthy need for control. So some people have a tremendous need to control their environment, expressed in fear when they can't control their environment, including people. A huge need to control your spouse, and then get super angry if you can't. And again, that's big. And those 3 unhealthy energy centers constitute the false self. The Bible calls the false self the sinful nature. That's the essence of the sinful nature. Those are the 3 temptations Christ faced in the desert. In all of them, his answer was, God meets that need in me, so I don't have to bow to this temptation. And that's also what you're doing with your sacred word. You're saying, and that thought comes up, wait, like Tom yelled at me today. This is bad because I need Tom to like me, because I need affirmation. That thought comes up in centering prayer, but then I surrender it and I say my sacred word, and I say, God, it's your presence and your action. I'm letting go of that, and I'm saying, let your presence make up for whatever that incident wants to fictitiously try to fill in me, if that makes any sense. So this is exciting, and very quickly, after the first 2-3 months of centering prayer, I had a massive loosening of a lot of stuff that was quite transformative, and my wife is like, wait, what's happened to you? But now, and then you keep digging deeper, and over years, there's more, but you're aware, and it's a lifetime journey, but it's a constant thing of gaining freedom, and every in my centering prayer, it's often been like plateaus, because in that plateau, I'm like, wait, this isn't going any deeper. Like, I'm not feeling much presence. That's because you're working through something. And then you get a breakthrough, and that part dies. It means it's surrendered. It's in the light of consciousness. It dies, and there's this increase of God's presence, and it just constantly keeps going like that. And the Bible says the path of the righteous is like the first gleam of dawn, growing ever brighter till the full light of day. I've often said to people, well, I don't often say this to people, but I've told some of my closest friends and my wife, I've said, my great desire is that when I hit age 60, and I always just say this relative to where I am at 53, but I started saying this at 45. I gave myself 15 years. I said, like, I just want to be free. I just want to be more free, so that when you sit with me, you just sense God's presence oozing out of me. And that's what I want my life to be like. I want God's presence and God's power to be alive in me. And that doesn't happen because you go to some guy's conference, or even that you know the whole Bible backwards, or that you've memorized the Bible. That happens because you die to yourself.
And you have been, and you will be. You have seen, and you will see. You